The Baptist Bible Hour now comes to you under the direction of Elder Lasserre Bradley, Jr., pastor of the Cincinnati Primitive Baptist Church.
Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing my great Redeemer's praise, the glories of my God and King, the triumphs of His grace.
This is Lasserre Bradley, Jr., inviting you to stay tuned for another message of God's sovereign grace. We're now in a 5-Sunday month, and so the need is particularly great. I urge you to take time to write us, and if you're able to help us supporting this work to get out the message of God's grace, we'd appreciate it so much. I'm indeed thankful for the letters we receive from people who describe how the Lord is using the message to bring both instruction and comfort. I want to thank all of you who are part of supporting this effort and hope that you will have the desire to continue that help, that the broadcast can remain on your local station. Our address is the Baptist Bible Hour, Box 17037, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45217. I look forward to hearing from you. God created man in His own image, and one of the unique things about human beings is that they have the ability to think. But their thinking is not always what it ought to be. As a matter of fact, because of Adam's sin, as a result of the fall, man's thinking is often terribly distorted. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 55, we read about the contrast between the thoughts of God and the thoughts of man. Verse 7 of Isaiah 55, "Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts, and let him return unto the Lord, and He will have mercy upon him, and to our God, for He will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Man's thoughts are indeed corrupted by sin. God says, "My thoughts are higher than yours." You may be satisfied with your thinking. You may try to defend your thinking. You may assume that your thinking is always correct. But the fact is, as a fallen sinner, you often are inclined to think in a way that suits your own personal interests, but your thoughts are not in harmony with the will of God. In the book of Genesis, chapter 6, verse 5, it says, "And God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." This is why God sent the flood in Noah's day, because every imagination and the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. And you can rest assured that apart from divine grace, that will always be the case. Man's thoughts are not thoughts that honor God or are in harmony with His holiness. Chapter 8, Genesis chapter 8, verse 21. "And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in His heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, neither will I again smite any more everything living as I have done." This is the promise then God made after the flood, based on the sacrifice that was made. It wasn't because man now was worthy and his actions and thoughts were commendable, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord and offered that blood sacrifice, which was typical of the perfect sacrifice of Jesus Christ that would ultimately be made. But notice that he makes this comment concerning the imagination of man, that he is evil from his youth. Nobody has to encourage somebody to go down the wrong road. Now, it is a fact that evil communications corrupt good manners, but left to himself, man will go in the wrong direction. Even from days of youth, his thoughts are not what they ought to be. Look at Psalm 10, and we read in verse 4, the wicked, through the pride of his countenance, will not seek after God. God is not in all his thoughts. God is not in his thoughts. Now, man does tend to be religious, but he develops his own religion. Many develop a God according to their own imaginations, according to their own desires. They say, I think this is the way God ought to be, and so they seek the God that they themselves have made. But man is not inclined to seek the true and living God. Romans chapter 3, in describing man's depravity, says, there's none that understandeth, there is none that seeketh after God. And the psalmist is here telling us that God is not in all of his thoughts. And then we turn to Psalm 94, and we get from these various passages of Scripture a clear concept, vividly presented as to where man is and what his thoughts are all about. Psalm 94, verse 11. The Lord knoweth the thoughts of man, that they are vanity. Often men are very proud of their thoughts. Philosophers say, here is our conclusion after looking at the human race, after doing extensive research. We have come to the conclusion that this is what life is all about, or here's the solution to the problems that you may be encountering. But God says that the thoughts of man are vain. They're empty. God is not in all their thoughts. But the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 28 and verse 9 says that God knows the thoughts that you have. He knows the thoughts that every human being has. Now you think about that. You cannot possibly have a thought in your mind and hide it from God. There are a lot of things that you may think about that you don't want other people to know that's what you're thinking. You can hide some thoughts from your friends, from your own companion, from husband or wife, but you cannot hide your thoughts from God. God knows all of your thinking, all of your motives, as well as all of your actions. God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts. So, man's thoughts in general, as we begin to enumerate some of the important issues about which he might be thinking, are invariably wrong, left to himself. When it comes to his thoughts about God, as I've already said, man is inclined to manufacture a God of his own. Sometimes men have hewn a God out of wood, carved a God out of stone, or looked into the heavens and said, we will worship the sun or the moon or the stars. Or they develop some god of mythology and they give him certain traits and characteristics and they worship their own God. But then there are those that say there is no God. There is no God. Psalm 14, verse 1. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. God describes that individual who declares there is no God as being a fool. He is in darkness. He is doing abominable works. The Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand and did seek God. You'll hear people say from time to time that God looked down through the ages, looked down through time to see who would ultimately seek Him, who would ultimately believe on Him, and made choice of them based on His foresight. But this passage, if none other passage ever refuted that, this certainly does.